Hello and welcome. My name is Trismegistus, and today we're going to be reading through and speculating about the latest Factorio Friday Facts. Friday Facts 385, Asteroid Collector. Posted by Arundel and Hrusa. Hello, we've already shown the space platform processing cycle in Friday Facts 380. Let's talk a little bit more about the machine which makes it all possible, the Asteroid Collector. Origin of Tentacles. By Arundel. When I was working on the early space platform concepts, trying to figure out how movable ships would work, we knew that we wanted some way of getting parts of asteroids onto the ship, but hadn't decided how that would be done. At this early stage, all of the new structures had very simple placeholder graphics. Although we start with grey boxes, it's best to get those replaced with something that looks more appropriate as soon as possible. The earliest placeholders are usually a quick sketch of something in the right general shape, something kit bashed, patched together with the existing graphics, or something grabbed from my mods. For the Asteroid Collector, a fairly generic side-mounted structure was used as the placeholder. If we stuck with something like this, then presumably it would use some sort of tractor beam to pull in asteroid chunks. Tractor beams, or electro grapples, etc., are the easy fallback option for this sort of situation because it's a simple concept to animate and code. So if you're not aware, grey boxes are a term that's used in dev. A grey box is literally just a grey box. So if you imagine in a graphics engine, you might, a 2D one type like Factorio, it would literally be a square rather than a box. But in a 3D, like first-person shooter type game, they would literally be boxes. And it's meant because usually like colour and textures and things aren't added, and so the default is just a grey. But what you might actually get in a grey box is, and this is what Arundel's talking about, is it's cobbled together from other bits and pieces. So they might be colour, they might actually be grey, might not actually be grey. And so it might be something you've pinched and you just stuck in, and it could be from another game, it could be from an asset store, it could be, you've literally sketched it and just stuck it in the game. So that's what grey boxing is. And the point it's making is that basically that's fine, and you can use that. A lot of people struggle with grey boxes because they can't really imagine it properly. There's a great video by Tim Kane sort of explaining grey boxing. But basically, the idea is to get something in the game and start ideating on it. And that's what this first graphic is showing. So it's suggesting that the first concept was for a tractor beam, which is very simple because, as it shows here, you can just do a graphical effect and you can have the thing being pulled in. Relatively simple, one would expect to code, because it's just sort of a changing, having an attractor and having it pulled towards the item. You can also sort of see that this is just roughly sketched. You can tell these are proper items with proper graphics. And look, this is just like wobbly lines on it. It looks like a really nice little thing, but you can actually see that it's just a rough concept sketch. And it says a tractor beam didn't feel very Factorio. It's too far into the magic, ethereal, sci-fi direction, and it's used all the time. I wanted something more mechanical, and Albert agreed. Tractor beams were out. It's not that Factorio doesn't have high-tech stuff, it's just better to do it in a way that's more tangible and industrial when we can. An example of that might, for example, be the beacons. That's a really weird high-tech thing, but they're sort of saying that they try to not default to that sort of stuff and instead go with the more industrial, more kit-bashed together type item. It says, I invented a lot of alternate options, but here are 5, along with some proof of concept sketches. Number 1, a rocket-guided harpoon or bag. Small rockets that would wrap the asteroid chunk in a bag on impact, then pull it to the collector mouth using a tow line. So this little thing here, this is the tow line, and this is the rocket part of it. So the idea with this is obviously not animated, and I presume it was just a picture anyway. It wasn't probably animated, but the idea is this fires out a thing, and so it kind of grabs the asteroid chunk, and it's connected to this line, and it pulls it in and drags it into the crusher. 2, a long inserter-like arm. Like an inserter, but dedicated to grabbing asteroid chunks. It would just put the chunk into the machine mouth or directly onto a belt behind. So now we see where we had that rocket launcher before and the little tow line. Those have gone, and now we've got this great big long inserter arm. Very in keeping with Factorio, I'd say. That's sort of, in a sense, an obvious solution that the engineer might come up with, just a big version of an inserter. It does look a bit unwieldy, and I imagine animating it would be a bit of a pain in the bum. But yeah, so that's another concept. Number 3, a paddle. Like the inserter arm, except it doesn't need to grab the chunk, it just needs to bat it into the direction of the collector mouth. So this is an interesting one. Basically, this, I mean, it looks like a shovel actually, when you really look at it. And I like the sort of wire going around it. That looks very funky. It looks like maybe it could extend with that. I don't think the idea is it can. It's just a thing. But basically, it's just like a bat or like a ping pong paddle or something like that, where it basically hits the asteroid and it knocks it into the into the crusher. Very interesting idea. Yeah, I would quite like to have seen that one in action, but yeah, a bit of a strange one. Number 4, scoops. The collector itself would just be a hole in the platform side that only collects chunks that happen to fall into it. This would be paired with a set of wedge-shaped blocks you could add to the front of platforms, so if you are moving and a chunk hits the wedge, it glances off, and this way you could guide chunks to the collector hole. This idea sounds fun initially because it makes the front shape of the ship important, but the downside is that most ships would just end up as V or W or WWW type shapes. Feels like this is a bit of a mini game from what they're describing here. So this is obviously the sort of mock-up of it, and particularly if you look at these angles here, it seems like they're a standard shape. So this is a standard shape, but then there's a different one here. So this looks more like a 45-degree angle, I think, and then these are sort of the 2x1, whatever that mass would be. Is it √3 or something? I don't know. And that then is that on the side, and that's another one at the other angle. I guess the idea is because the ship is moving forward, because you'd actually expect if this was hitting the ship, it would actually bounce off. It wouldn't roll down this, but it ends up feeling a bit like a mini game, doesn't it? That how do you design this to get the most chunks into your collectors? But I think the point they're making there is very good, that you would just end up with exactly the same shape. It's not going to be that hard to optimize something like this. I suppose there's maybe a balance between how many collectors do you have, how many of these shapes do you have, and do you have 3 in a row, or do you just have one with the great big scoop on it? So there's something like that maybe that could be optimized, but it does feel fairly minimal in terms of it's not a complex design to really mess about with. So unless maybe they bounced off, at angles and you had to control that in some way. It becomes almost like pinball, doesn't it? Of, how do you get these into this, reverse pinball. You don't want it to go in the hole in pinball, but, you get the idea. This is how I would probably expect you would actually work in real life. This is what you would do. You would probably try and grab them with in a scoop. I say that, you'd probably, with something as, it's how you do atom collection when there's concepts for interstellar spacecraft. They often have atom scoops on the front, and it's collecting dust and small atomic particles in order to use in its engine. With them being great big asteroid bits, you probably wouldn't want to do that because you'd destroy your own spaceship. But conceptually, that's the same sort of idea, so that's almost where it's coming from. But as I say, it does feel like you just end up with exactly the same ship every time. 5. A flexible snake arm. Unlike the inserter-style arm, this would act on the same ground plane as the asteroid chunks and the platform itself, meaning it would need to snake around any protruding defences. This is an interesting option to build with, as the platform shape affects interception time. I thought I could do something pretty cool with the flexible arm idea. I started with a set of sketches, trying different machine structures and collector mouse shapes. The arm itself is most similar to the design of real-world snake robots, but with it being anchored at one end, it quickly became known as the Tentacle. It is also worth noting that I moved the crushing function out of the asteroid collector to a dedicated machine. This lets the crusher be used again by some later game advanced recipes and expands the middle of the platform. So I've actually opened this up as a separate image so you get a better look at them. These are all concepts for the grabber arm, the Tentacle, and as you can see, we've sort of got all sorts of different designs here. Arundel really has a style that kind of works for Factorio. That's why SpaceX is such a good mod, really, from that point of view, because he really has a grasp of how to make those industrial, mechanical, but utilitarian designs. You look at some of these with the detail on these. I say my feel, it also has, there's an element of a cyberpunk thing that comes in with it. In a lot of his designs, and it's particularly around the cabling. So this exposed cabling, or exposed, conduits for cabling, I suppose, more than just the cable itself. But, these end up feeling very, again, I've used this said this in other videos, sort of Akira style, where it's it's that, you know, sort of beautiful utilitarian, you know, mechanical, you know, electrical engineering thing. And it really just works in Factorio. It's really, really nice. You've got some of these are quite interesting designs on their own. When you get these ones here, I don't know about you, these are, I mean, this one, and this one. I suppose that's another touch point for it. They look like they could be in Battle Angel Alita or Gundam. You know, these look like they could be cyborg heads with a great big tongue that comes out and, you know, grabs your enemy or something. Or, you know, injects something into them or rips their head off. It's quite a violent manga. But, you know, they sort of fit with that. And, you know, these look like they could be, you know, mecha heads in an anime. And so that's where it all sort of comes from. It feels like that, you know, that's the touch point for the design aesthetic, which really works. You know, that fits to me with the whole space platform thing. But these are just gorgeous. You know, there's actually if you go to the website, there's a thing that shows quite a few of the early concept sketches just all stuck together, and I love this sort of stuff. If any of those do watch this and you want to do a design book, I would, you know, happily buy 3 copies. Because I just love this sort of stuff. I mean, I have no artistic talent whatsoever. So, you know, when I see these sorts of things, I just absolutely adore them. But yeah, interesting point as well that the crushing function has been made separate. I think the point here when he says about the used to gain some late game advanced recipes and expand the middle of the platform, I don't think that's necessarily referring. That's more like you know, it gave us the option to do this, or, you know, that was come up with another concept. It's not sort of saying, you know, it's not really revealing. We know I've seen, and I've pointed out, you know, that when we see some of the crushers, they're actually like got loops, like self loops, like they're putting things back onto belts so that they go back into crushers. And I think that may be what it's referring to, that the grabber arm just pulls it in, and then you can have these loops with the crushers, and maybe have lots of different crushers and doing crushing different things. And that's kind of what it lets you build. You can build the crusher somewhere else and just have, you know, belts around it or inserters and what have you. Whereas if it was stuck on the edge and it had to be completely free so that the grabber arm could grab, then you've very limited options for doing that, and that's just what that's referring to, I think. Below is the concept art I presented to Covrex. Up to this point, people were sceptical about the snake or tentacle idea, so it was down to the concept art to win people over. Otherwise, we might be back to square one. Fortunately, as soon as Covrex saw this, he was on board and other people were convinced too. Harusa stepped in to make it a reality so he can take it from here. So these are the in-game concept art versions. It's actually a couple of previous videos, I've referred to a slight disconnect between kind of the thing they were showing and the art. And I think I figured out, looking at this, what the issue is, in a sense. It's not really an issue, but these are perfectly in focus, yeah? And this is out of focus. It's just blown up, I think. It's just a magnified image. But you can see it better on the thing. And it's that difference between something that's clearly been, you know, zoomed in or zoomed out, or, you know, or a screen grab or what have you, and something that's perfectly in focus as a picture. And that difference between, well, this has got, you know, JPEG artifacted edges and this hasn't, just like triggers something in my brain that just says this is different. It's a bit like the thing when you see a cartoon and there's a little bit of the background or something, or you know, some other object that's like different to the others because it's been drawn on a cell rather than the matte painting background. And you know just instantly that's going to blow up, or that's going to fall off, or that's going to hit them on the head or something like that, because that's drawn differently to the rest. And it's that, basically. And it's not bad. It's not criticism. It's just that I've realised what that disconnect was. So yeah, I mean, looking at these pieces of concept art, again, it just looks brilliant. And it does look face-ish, again, but in a bit more of a friendly way. So this does look like a tongue to me, coming out of a mouth, and you've got 2 eyes there. They're obviously meant to be cameras, I would guess, that are basically, you know, acting as the targeting system for the grabber arm. Or they call it Tentacle, I think, don't they? Tentacle arm itself looks great. I'm sure this is meant to be like the winding mechanism to wind it in and out. And I hope eventually when we see this, you know, in game, it's all lovely and animated. You've then got, you know, the accoutrement, the pipes and wires and all that sort of stuff. Looks like this is meant to be the motor that's driving those gear wheels that do the arm in and out. Yeah, just looks amazing, basically. So this is just showing it so that you can see it a bit better as a full picture because of how I zoom in. And as you see, it really looks awesome in 2 orientations, rather. It's also nice to see a bit more detail on the space platform up close. It really does look good. It reminds me a lot of a Borg cube. You know, that sort of, you know, it's just panels slapped together because there needs to be a panel there type of thing, rather than, you know, being a pretty and aesthetic design, which is really works well for Factorio. From concept to reality by Arusa. Taking a step back in time now, let's talk about how the gameplay side of things unfolded in the meantime. As a keystone feature of the platform production cycle, the Collector started its life under Erendor's hand as a grey box. It was a simpler time. Asteroids were not even a thing back then, so the machine was just an assembler which continuously crafted chunks out of thin air. Once we had asteroids in the game, the first version that actually collected them cast a simple rectangle around it. Any entering chunks would immediately get teleported into the Collector's inventory. Nothing flashy, just enough for playtesting. The next advancement was to collect asteroids mechanically. Our seeding kicked things off by implementing Erendor's earlier harpoon idea. And that's just what we see here in this video. It's really interesting, I must say, just as a general point, to see the early iterations of a lot of the graphics. One of the things that is interesting to note in particular, and if we remember this from, you know, some of the earlier Friday Facts, there's a box here, and we're not allowed boxes on platforms anymore. So clearly that's a sort of design choice that's been made at some point to say, right, well, no, you can't have boxes on platforms. Only, you know, there's only the internal storage thing. We also see the very early concept of the engine here, the motor, and it's interesting how close it is actually to the sort of later design. It's obviously a heck of a lot more detailed, and you know, it's, you know, I mean, I think it's meant to be turned off here anyway, but you know, it's very different. We've got the hub, which is this big H in the middle, and you see, this is what I was mentioning before about grey box. This is a grey box graphic in that is literally just, because Factorio is a 2-bit game. It's not a 2-bit game, it's a 2D game. 2-bit game. The hub is just a H on a square box, or just a square. And that's what grey boxing is basically. You know, you just stick it in. But they might have had like a placeholder, you know, graphic, or it was just something taken from somewhere else in another game. But the main point of this is these. If you imagine this concept here with the rockets that fire off and bring the asteroid chunks in with a tow line. That's essentially what this is showing. So if you imagine this, when it fires out here, if that's the next one, there we go. So this would be the rocket flying out. It intercepts the asteroid chunk, and then the wire that comes back is what's being pulled in there. And that's essentially the concept of it. And it also clearly illustrates this thing, because Factorio has like perfect aim because of how they do it. These things are flying out to where this chunk is, this, you know, asteroid chunk is going to be, not where it actually is. So it's like perfectly predicting where the chunk is and bring it in. And that's just an artifact. You know, that's how the ammo works. When you shoot a laser and it's, well, laser's a bad example. You shoot a gun, a turret, and it hits the thing instantly, even if the thing is moving, which, you know, targeting it could be, but it sort of shoots to where it will be. It's a bit interesting thing when you really think about it, but yeah. So this is just the sort of basic concept of the arms working. Well, they're not the arms, are they? They're the rocket tow lines. We can also see the very early iteration of the platform itself. Clearly, the basic concept was there, but you know, this is very undetailed version of it by the looks of things. No sort of real structural element to it. Again, I love this stuff. This is why I love the Friday Facts. Because, you know, it's really interesting to see how things are developed and what their choices were. At this point, the collector could be placed anywhere on the platform. Requiring it to touch the edge, similar to an offshore pump, was considered, but no conclusions had been made yet. Testing with self-imposed limitations took place and quickly exposed a crucial problem. Since the effective reach was relatively long, the optimal strategy was to always inset the collectors away from the lucrative platform edge. Such setups invited little decision-making from the player. The entire edge could be dedicated to turrets, while the interior provided plenty of room to unload and process chunks. On top of all that, the visuals of harpoons or arms reaching over other buildings for chunks at platform level were dubious at best. The logical conclusion was that the collectors should require access to open space. This happens to create an interesting dynamic between the defences and resources collection and rewards efficient belt usage. This was at the same time when Erindor was putting together the concept for a more generic feeling bendable arm, which ultimately made it into the game. So what they're explaining there basically is that although they're showing it here like on the corners when the gun's on the edges, in reality when they play tested this, and this is one of the things you always have to remember with development, particularly of games, that I don't think is really talked about enough, but because there's a narrative, I'm going to get deep here, but there's a bit of a narrative sometimes that about bad decision making, and that causes crunch and all those sort of things. And I'm not saying those they don't happen, those aren't a problem, etc., etc. But the reality of games is they have to be fun, and you can't really know if something is fun until it's in your game and you can actually play it. And that's why you do things like grey boxing and prototyping and all those sorts of things. And clearly what they found is that the optimal strategy was kind of too obvious in that you stick these things, you stick a line of turrets on. It's like a wall, basically. You just line of turrets, line of these things, and then you've got all this space at the back to do inserters and belts and all this sort of stuff. And there's no need to be efficient and there's no need to do anything different. It's just the most boring turrets, arms, or they're not arms, they were rockets, and you're done. And you could maybe have 2 rows of the rocket things and what have you, but it's not really all that different. By imposing this limitation that the grabber arms as they became needed to be on the edge, that means that either your guns need to be on the side of them, so you're limiting the number of grabbers you can have, or they need to be behind them. And we know, of course, that a gun turret has a limited range. So the gun turrets need to be able to shoot as far away as they can to destroy the big asteroids so that you can grab the stuff. But that limits the number of the arms you can put on. So you're then getting a bit more of an interesting trade-off. And there's probably arguments, that people could, have basically sort of saying, well, it's better if you put all grabbers on the front and guns behind them. And others say, well, no, if you put them forward, you destroy more chunks and, then your platforms don't get damaged. So that sort of more interesting balance is probably what they're talking about there, I think. Day of the Tentacle. Now it was up to me to figure out how to make it all happen. With the expected behaviour laid out, I could separate the task into multiple individual features, quite like you do while playing Factorio itself. You want to move at increments which can work on their own. Drawing the arm. Just that, no other behaviour or function. Moving the arm between poses. Weaving the arm around the platform without clipping or colliding. Is it even possible in all cases? Making the collectors not waste time by fighting over the same chunks. For reasons that will be helpful later, I've decided to express a particular pose as a segmented line, a series of angles starting from the base. Additionally, each pose includes an extension value. This way, the arm can slide up and down along the length of the curve without calculating any new points. So I should say we are getting into a bit more technical territory here. So the caption is arm pose expressed as a list of angles and extension amount. So what it's saying is basically the path for the arm is essentially predefined. Appears to be what it's saying. I may be misinterpreting this, but as I understand it, what they're essentially saying is that they're creating this path to where the asteroid, because I think I mentioned that it knows where the object is going to be, so it can aim itself at that exact location, and then it knows a path for the arm to trace, and it can do things like, saying about clipping and colliding. It can draw that path around any objects, so it could be really curvy or what have you, and then basically it's just like it extends along that path, and that's the animation that's actually playing. So when we see it's a bit below, but that's sort of showing something else, but when we see it reaching out and grabbing, it's actually just extending itself along that path, and that extension 2.5 to 4.0, so that's 2.5 and that's 4.0, I think. No, wrong. 1, 2, half, 1, 2, 3, 4. That's what that's showing. And then 1.2. So those are the sort of arm extensions, and that's where. So it would start at the bottom here and it would add on little bits of arm in order to extend it up that path. So link rotations used to draw the collector arms, and these are all the bits and pieces that it sticks together. So as it's coming out of the the collector like hub, as it were, it's essentially adding these extra bits and pieces onto the bottom and sort of growing in that telescopic way. And presumably as it goes around these curves, it's switching out which bits is which. That's really quite clever. Next, I tried adding a control curve, which put some swing into the arm movement, but it turned out a little... So what we're showing here is this is the arm curving out. It's obviously changing what it's doing as it goes out. So these two arms, look, we'll wait for it to loop round it. Oh, they're a better example. They're both going after the same chunks, look. In fact, it seemed to grab two at the same time then. Yeah, they're both fighting over the same chunk. I suppose that makes sense because that's a later step, isn't it? Making the collectors not waste time by fighting over the same chunks. So he's not implemented that, or they've not implemented that yet. So these are going for the same chunk. And interesting, you've noticed how, do you see that one whip out there? But clearly this curve that he's adding to do the pullback is like really aggressive. And it's whipping them round in a really bizarre way. Yeah, that's what I said. I didn't actually saw that, but it's like going after the same chunk, and then when it's not there, it then shoots off into the distance. It's a bit, yeah. Change of plans. While thinking about the collector, we've decided it needs to be able to harvest additional chunks after it has extended. Since the arm is represented as a series of angles, we can blend between the starting and desired pose by simply blending each individual one. Ideally, we would want the claw to move at a constant speed. However, because we are blending angles, said speed varies greatly. Depending on whether the arm is extended to 10 or 20 units, turning the base by 5 degrees will lead to vastly different results. Even though the arc of the travelling collector appears circular, it is in fact a complex shape which cannot be easily measured. So instead, I found a way to weight all the individual angles together quickly and project the arm position onto a circle. Then I measure the distance between two arm poses on a circle to get a good consistent estimate of the travelling distance. So there's a little bit of complexity there in terms of what's being expressed. I'm not sure this isn't MATLAB actually, but simulation of the arm blend I've made to test my calculations. The arm is projected onto the teal circle to estimate the arc travel distance. What they're basically saying is that they made a design decision that it should be able to grab multiple chunks. So in this case here, you see how they're going out, they're grabbing one thing and then coming back. Obviously they're fighting over them as well, but they're grabbing one thing and then coming back. And what this is saying is that actually they wanted the arms in the end to grab multiple chunks when they go out for a single grab. A bit like an inserter sort of saying, right, well, I can hold 5 things. There's one over there and one over there, so I'll grab that one and grab that one. Oh, there's nothing else, so I might as well pull back into the hub. And so these, like the green one and the purple one, are the positions. As I said, it has this perfect knowledge of where the chunk, the bit is going to be, and so it goes and says, right, well, this is where I am. This is the one I've just grabbed, or I'm grabbing, and this is the one I'm going to next. And the point was that doing that properly, in a sense, by drawing all the iterations in between, was kind of, well, mathematically very difficult. And so what they're doing instead is essentially blending between two positions. So the computer itself, the internal mass is basically just moving this over to the desired positions. And you see how, because it's made of these different segments, they're just like squeezing and tweaking the shape of the segments as it goes around a curve, because that curve is not going to sort of perfectly match to the, like the distances because of the bend that you're doing each time. And so it's just it's almost like an optical illusion will be happening where it looks like it's properly moving out in and out and like the distance is changing, but in fact it's actually like squishing the components in order to get it around the curve. I'm slightly interpreting that because I've not sort of done this type of maths before. The final design problem is that there is a lot of different ways for the arm to travel between two poses. That is because of the angular speed relationship mentioned above. The shorter the arm, the faster it can turn, but it also takes some time to retract and extend to reach the optimal travelling distance. Just like the arc distance, I spent some time trying to express the mathematical problem and do a true solution. Then I realised that I can get really close with much less effort. Instead of searching for the absolute best extension to swing at, I chose extensions at some fixed interval, compute the distance travelled for each and select the best one. In practice, you can't even tell whether the path is plus or minus 0.5 units from the absolute best arc there is to take. So this illustrates that, showing 3 of the best paths considered for movement. Increments at which the turning radius is considered are highlighted. So this is adding on to the angular turn. So if you imagine that is an arm that's of a fixed length and it's moving around between these different points. Well, what about if you need to move in and out, basically? So although these look like curves, or sections of a circle, they aren't really. And what's actually happening is the arm is kind of getting shorter and longer. And as it's moving between this, so this is really long, and this is like, sort of medium length sort of thing. And so it's sort of basically, this is what I was saying about it squishes itself. And you see how we go from these 8 segments here to 4 segments here. And so this is the arm kind of retracting as it, moves in, because it's doing a, it's like grabbing something that, so if that's out there and this is out here, it's sort of doing that movement. And you notice how my arm shortens, and that's what it's doing there. And basically, rather than do like a proper solution, it's all mathematically perfect. As I say, that's what we're doing here with a blend. And it's basically the same thing. They just say, right, well, we go from this many to this many, and you can't really tell. You can't really tell that it's not doing, moving the segments in and out as it should do, and they're staying all the same length. You can't tell. Around this time, we started debating the performance cost. Kovarex liked the feel of the arms a lot, but wanted to ensure that all the links between being simulated would not impact large factories with dozens of platforms. To that effect, we could use the previous step. Since we've ensured that the claw travels at a predictable speed, we do not need to update its position every tick. Once the desired path is found, we store its distance. Then we increment a single internal number which tracks how far along this path the claw has travelled. Only if the arm is visible to the player do we evaluate the actual intermediate arm pose. This is, imagine this, but instead of really doing this, there's just the start point and the end point. And if you're not watching, it's just hopping between the two. It'll be doing it at a certain speed so that it's not infinitely fast sort of thing. But it's not actually calculating all these segments and all that sort of stuff when you're not watching. It will do when you are. And of course, you can only watch one platform at a time. So if you've got 20 platforms, they're all grabbing arms and what have you. It's not calculating them, so it's minimizing the performance cost. Going around the block. With the arm motion covered, I moved over to the pathfinding problem. The initial idea was to pull a classic A* and map out all adjacent tiles to find the shortest path to the collector from each one. However, the records of each tile took up a lot of space, and the resulting paths ended up being very jagged, which looked terrible and required further processing. Furthermore, the collectors often sit around wide open areas. Traversing those tile by tile every time a chunk floats by is an absolute overkill. So the A* is just a pathfinding, it's a search algorithm actually, but it's basically like you can use it for pathfinding essentially. In the light of this observation, I've decided to implement a navigation mesh. A nav mesh covers the open areas with large rectangles. Then it casts rays to find all direct connections between significant corners of those rectangles. Construction and maintenance of the nav mesh takes some computational power whenever the player builds platform tiles, but in return, the much more frequent path finding is greatly sped up. Even better, the paths we find on a nav mesh are the shortest and simplest possible. So this is the old approach, the A* approach, and it says the old tile navigation. Notice the jagged path. I'll be totally honest, I sat here and sort of tried to interpret this. I'm not 100% sure what the jagged path is. I know these must be costs, so this is like working out the cost in order to move to that, in quotes, grab the asteroid. I don't know if the blue bit is meant to be the arm or the yellow bit going around the edge. I think the yellow bit is like the no travel path. I don't really know, as I say. I'm not 100% sure what it is. I do know that it's trying to kind of avoid overlapping the things, so that it avoids any sort of, well, is that on top of that, or is that below that, or is it the same height as that type questions. It's a bit clearer here, I think, what's actually kind of being illustrated. It says the final nav mesh system. And the player is drawing bits of platform. You know, they're not because they're blueprinting them on. But you can see on these squares are what it's using to do the navigation. And as they add the platform and say it's actually a blueprint and take it away, those squares change. And it's using that. There's a really good example here. You see they build that in. And then the arm follows that outer square, and that's what it's basically saying. It's saying it will follow these like squares and try and hit the lines. I believe the raycasted lines. It looks messy, but I guess this is more efficient. I say this is way beyond me. I've not done any graphical type stuff. We do see the arm dumping stuff overboard as we've seen before. To make the polygonal nav mesh path more palatable, I approximate it using a non-uniform rational B-spline, NURBS, which smooths out the sharp corners. The nice property of NURBS is that it quite reliably hugs the guiding points. That makes it very popular in 3D modelling application. Besides smoothing, there is a few other minor tricks I use to enhance the look. Having a minimal retraction distance between each collected chunk to prevent vacuum cleaner collecting. Giving the claw horizontal wind-up and landing when the targets are in line to prevent pogo collecting. Wiggling each arm slightly at random to stop them turning in a corner in unison. Leading swings with the base of the arm to make the front appear to be dragged. So I think this is a bit clearer to me as to what's going on with this whole nav mesh thing. Basically, it's sort of picking these points and it's saying, right, so there's going to be a chunk here, there's going to be a chunk here, and there's going to be... Oh, in fact, he's actually putting those on, aren't they? But there's a chunk there, and so it calculates that path, and that's like this is how you get to the path. And you notice how it adheres, apart from when it can't because it's close to the edge. It adheres to these corners basically. But then the dev is basically doing all these sort of wiggly tricks basically. So it's making it look more realistic. You see it. This is particularly good, isn't it, when it flips around here. Where there's like a drag effect that means the main head is following this, but the actual like rest of the body kind of swings out as it swings around to make it look like it's the head that's doing the leading. But yeah, I think that's a little clearer to me how the nav mesh thing is working. It's finding these points and then they're applying some wiggles to make it look a bit more organic, a bit more realistic. Also, just to note, I've realised that the chests shown on the thing would be these. They're just infinite chests, so it's just for testing purposes. And maybe there was never a plan to put chests on, but that's just to get rid of the stuff. Predictors. One known issue around the time I was starting out with the collector was platform speed. With high quality thrusters, the platform could eventually move so quickly that turrets could not turn fast enough to shoot incoming asteroids in time. I knew this could be a big problem for the collectors as well. The collectors cannot just constantly test every chunk every frame. It was necessary to narrow down the selection. To that effect, every time a new chunk spawns, it will cast a line forward and register with all collectors along the way. Since the limiting factor is availability of arms, it is the arms which check for incoming chunks whenever it finishes its previous task. This design gives us room to project the chunk position forward based on how long it would take the given arm to get to it and arrange a punctual rendezvous. Additionally, superfast chunks no longer pose a problem because even those will be registered in advance. The arms move into position and intercept the chunks the moment they touch the collection area. A good video showing that that's captioned predicted chunk movement with connections to registered collectors sped up. So essentially, every time there's a new asteroid that spawns, and it's out front in the chunk forward, it basically tells these collector arms where it's going to go, essentially. So, and which ones matter, if you see what I mean. So that basically, I was saying about the perfect prediction of position, that's what's happening. So if you notice, these are the paths of the thing. And it's informing. You see, it's got these sort of square things. It's telling each of these collectors which one it needs to pay attention to. I don't know if you saw one go red there. Must be some kind of like timing element to it of sort of saying, maybe that's the worst one or the most difficult to get to or something like that. But it's the perfect knowledge, basically. So they go out and they grab where the things are going to be, not where they actually are. Conclusion. Once all the major work was wrapped up, it was just a matter of finishing off the smaller details before the collector was ready to go into the master branch. This is things like the building restriction, blueprint support, copy, paste, etc. Since the navmesh and NURB systems were all new code, there was a lot of writing tests, chasing down edge cases and fine-tuning the performance. Overall, in our playtesting, we're happy to say that the Asteroid Collector works really well to give the platforms the unique look and gameplay that we were hoping for. As always, we look forward to collecting your opinion chunks at the usual places. I hope you enjoyed today's Friday Facts video and might consider coming back for another one. If you want to chat about the latest Factorio Friday Facts, then you can find me live streaming Factorio every Saturday over my Twitch channel @TrisMagistus. Thanks for watching. Cheers. Two-bit game.